Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to round 11 of the AROC Chris Knott Insurance UK Touring Car Championship. It's actually the penultimate round, is round 11. We're here at Brands Hatch in the Giulietta TCR, and we've got just under 50 minutes to go in this qualifying session. It's currently led by Alan Matthews, who just put in an absolute flyer in Sector 1 and Sector 3 to take the fastest lap of the session so far. It's a 131.5, followed closely behind by Will Inglis with a 131.8. So these two on top in qualifying at the moment. Everyone other than Barry Clayton running the medium, or rather running the soft tyre. Barry Clayton running the medium tyre. It's quite interesting actually. We've seen Barry recently likes to use the harder compound every now and again, as we see him just enjoying a little bit of rallycross there. They didn't often race a rallycross variant of the Giulietta, but Barry Clayton's testing one out anyway, so good on him for that. And then we have George Brooke Battersby in P3 with a 131 point, that's wrong, a 131.8 rather. As we see in terms of the championship standings, it is still all to play for at the top of the Pro Championship. We have Colin Keneath leading with 419 points. This is excluding dropped score. We have Andrew Whitehead 376 and Matt Daly with 340. I believe Matt Daly is out of contention now in terms of the lead of the championship with 2 rounds to go, one of them actually being a triple header, the final round in the 156. We see Alan Matthews going a new fastest lap, a 131 flat for him there. That's secured his pole position just that little bit more. Now he's got about half a second buffer between him and Greg Young behind, so he's that's a nice lap for him there. With 12 minutes to go in the session, he should be feeling relatively comfortable with that. And then in terms of the AM Championship as well, we have Guy Swarbrick leading with 349 points, Rosie Hodgson with 325, Paul Millman and Steve Knight. Paul Millman 319 points and Steve Knight 315 points. So all to play for in both championships. That AM Championship in particular will be very fun to watch. As we see now, no one is currently on an absolute flyer, it must be said. Yeah, no one kind of on the best at the moment. It is kind of the middle point of qualifying, so we don't expect the most blistering laps to be out there on track. We have no sight of Matt Daly, Andrew Whitehead or Colin Keneath yet. They might be feeling quite comfortable. Actually, no, I do believe, do we have Andrew Whitehead in the car? We do not. For the moment, they may be feeling relatively comfortable, so might not be joining the qualifying session just yet, as we are on board with Alan Matthews as he heads round down into Sterling's, ready to start another lap. As it looks like this one has been a little bit slow. He might be drinking as a bit of a warm-up. Of course, these cars can set multiple qualifying laps in succession. You don't go through the tyres that much, and it looks like Alan Matthews will be going for another attempt here. As we see him, we'll stay on board with him now as he heads down the Brabham Straight into the Paddock Hill Bend. One of my favourite corners on any British circuit, Paddock Hill Bend. It puts a lot of load through the front left tyre and can really separate the brave drivers from the not so brave drivers. Of course, it can go very wrong. It's quite high speed, and you've got the track basically falls away from you. As we see Alan heading through the Graham Hill Bend now, using as much of the track as he dares there, going outside of the white line a little bit. We know that's the favoured touring car line to actually go off the circuit onto the grass there. As we see, we'll go through Surtees. Now, Surtees is where you can lose a lot of time, because not only if you, I mean, especially in these TCRs, not only if you understeer, you'll lose a little bit of time, but you'll suffer with the consequences of that understeer all the way down Pilgrim's Drop, as we see Alan Matthews heading down Pilgrim's Drop now and into Hawthorne. And it looks to be not an amazing Sector 1 for Alan Matthews there, still relatively competent, but nothing amazing in terms of setting his personal best so far, as we will stay with him for this lap so we get an idea of the whole circuit as we head towards the Derek Minter Straight down through Westfield, Dingle and Sheens. Quite an interesting part of the track actually, this bit of Sector 2, and then we come down through Sterling's and down Clearways. As we see, really a test of how brave you are, how much confidence you have in the front end of the car, and it looks like Alan Matthews was just on the limit there in terms of how brave he was feeling with the car, using as much of the track as he dared to come across the line now, and sets a purple Sector 3. So he was very brave through that final corner, but it worked for him. He was 38 seconds, I believe, through the final sector there, absolutely flying. So he knows what he has to do now. He just needs to hook it up with Sector 1 and Sector 2, and he should build that gap to P2 even more, as we see Barry Clayton improves to go 131.9 before parking, getting quite an interesting manner, more exuberant manner of parking, shall we say. George Brook Battersby gets a little bit closer there with an improvement on his previous lap. But Greg Young, the closest challenger to Alan Matthews, who's been on top for a few minutes now, still has nothing against Alan Matthews does Greg Young, as we're on board with Rob Whitney. Rob Whitney's put a time on the board. He's returned to the pit, so we won't stay on board with him. And Rosie Hodgson in P10 improves there. She's still a couple of seconds off the pace, but she's only set a couple of laps. There's plenty of time left in this session to set a few more laps, try and get a little bit closer. This weekend will be very important to, obviously, with a good position in the championship standings at the moment. She can push towards P3 with the final couple of remaining rounds, as we'll go on board now with Greg Young. Greg Young has just set a personal best Sector 1. He heads down Pilgrim's Drop now. Let's see what speed he gets to. 140 miles an hour on the speed trap for Greg Young, as we've seen flying around the right hand there. Puts a lot of load through the front tyres there. The drivers will be watching the tyre life, as these Giulietta TCRs really do eat up the front tyres, and Brands Hatch doesn't help that in any way, shape or form as we head down towards the end of Sector 2 now. Not an improvement for him through Sector 2. Still a half-second gap for him to close up as we head through the final part of the circuit. Will he echo Alan Matthews in being very brave through the Clark curve? Let's see now, as he just about misses the apex there and doesn't quite go as wide as we saw Alan Matthews going, and he comes back onto the Brabham Straight. Let's see what time he can set as he crosses the line. It doesn't look like it's going to be competitive enough to improve, and it's not there. That lap kind of went away from him in the final couple of sectors there, so we'll have to head back to the pits and regroup, I imagine, to see an improvement in time for Guy Swarbrick there. He's currently P6 with personal best Sector 1 there. And we will go on board now with Will Inglis. Will Inglis hoping to improve on his personal best. He's currently P3. He led this qualifying for a little while, but it doesn't look like this lap is the one that will do it. As I can see now, we have Will Harper on track as well. He hasn't yet posted a time, but he is absolutely flying at the moment, it must be said. We unfortunately can't join him as he hasn't yet posted a time. I'll see if there's someone who might have him in his vision. Just in the background there, that is Will Harper, as he has set 2 personal best sectors. Obviously it's being his first lap, but it looks to be fairly strong, and Barry Clayton still having that purple Sector 3 as we speak. As does Rob Whitney. Rob Whitney improves in Sector 3 as well. So it looks like drivers finding a lot of time in Sector 3. So that is one to watch out for as we head into the race and head into the final part of this qualifying session. And Will Harper does post a fairly strong first qualifying lap there. He goes P5 with a 1:32.1. That was a very nice lap for his first attempt. Let's see if in the final couple of minutes now he can bring that down and push towards the upper ends of the grid. Barry Clayton will go back on board with him. He is improving, as was George Brook Battersby there. But unfortunately for Barry Clayton, Sector 2 all went a bit wrong. They lost about half a second by the looks of things. He may abandon this attempt, or he may choose to carry on and see what he can do. So if he can find more gains in Sector 3, like a couple of other drivers have so far in this session. See, difference in setup here. This is obviously an open setup championship. We do kind of have a baseline setup provided for us, which obviously the drivers are very thankful for, but they are free to tweak it as much as they please. And let's see Barry Clayton's end of his lap now as he comes across the line. Will it be that 1:31 flat? It does not. It was by about the tune of a second slower than what it needed to be there, as we see. That looks like Guy Swarbrick and George Brook Battersby heading out of the pits now. A little bit too close for comfort, probably. They want a bit more cleaner, so they can get a nice solid lap in. Let's see if they have a little battle. Actually, I wouldn't mind a little bit of a sneaky preview of what we're about to have in the next couple of races coming up within the next hour. As we see George heading around now. But yes, this is obviously an open setup championship, so drivers are free to tweak things like aero suspension as much as they'd like, and that is an improvement for Will Harper there. Will Harper snuck that under the radar, carried on with that quali stint, and is now P3. He pips Will Inglis to the post of P3 there by the tune of 500ths of a second, so it's still very close at the top end of the grid here. In fact, the first 6 positions only separated by less than a second, so we got quite a I think we can get ready for quite an interesting race here in race 1 in just a few moments time. But yes, Will Harper showing a strong performance so far in this qualifying session. Only a second lap, and it looks like, is he going to be improving on this time round? I don't think he is. It's actually his 5th lap according to this. He might have taken a bit of a breather in between, as we see. An interesting place to swap there, and Steve Knight joins us now, going P7 on his first attempt, so a nice lap from him there. He just pips Paul Millman to P7 there, so the AM battle heating up just as much as the pro battle as we enter the final stages of this qualifying session now. But yes, so that open setup that I was mentioning just a second ago, Barry Clayton getting ever closer there. He jumps up and takes P2 now, only 0.2 of a second behind Alan Matthews, and that'll be spurring Alan Matthews on to try and go just that little bit quicker, because it's all of a sudden that pole position has just become a little bit less secure than he would like, I imagine. He's still got a bit of a gap, but not too much to play with, especially if the other drivers start to improve now that the track rubbers in just that little bit more. Now we've got some cars really barreling around it now. As we see, everyone sat in Sector 1 as they come out now for their final qualifying attempts. What will be the final attempts in this session now. We have everyone sat in Sector 1. In fact, I believe the only driver who isn't is... Oh no, that's me. I was looking at the screen there and I was wondering who someone who was just kind of messing about in Sector 3 was, and it was me. As you see, a little bit of an error from Guy Swarbrick there. That's going to compromise his lap ever so slightly, and he has Will Inglis coming up behind him, gaining just that little bit now. He'll be wanting to get out of the way of Will Inglis as quickly as possible if he doesn't want to anger him and end up making himself an enemy in the race, but Guy Swarbrick is flying at the moment. Will Inglis does go purple in Sector 2 though, so Will Inglis is also hoping that Guy Swarbrick can get his lap done as quickly as possible, and it's not the best lap for Guy Swarbrick this time round. That little bit of a mistake has cost him in Sector 2 there. But we will stay on board with Will Inglis, actually, because I think this could be quite a good one from Will Inglis. It was an improvement in Sector 1, but Sector 2 was so much quicker than what we've seen so far. He may be able to claw it back. I don't think he can. He doesn't take as much time away as I thought he would, but he takes P4 away from Will Harper. Very nice effort in the middle part of the lap there for Will Inglis. And we're going to go on board with Will Harper, because Will Harper is also out on track. Everyone's sat in Sector 1. Will Harper is coming towards the end of another attempt at a fastest lap here. It was an improvement in Sector 1, much like it was the case for Will Inglis, but he does improve big time in Sector 3 and jumps all the way up into P2. Only a 10th behind Alan Matthews now. Alan Matthews will be really wanting to get on track as quickly as possible and try and improve on that time if he wants any hope of securing pole position. It's still his to lose, but yeah, it's looking a little bit less comfortable for him now. It was a great lap from Will Harper there, as we see Barry Clayton in the pit, so I don't know why it's telling me who's currently improving in Sector 3, but we'll go on board with Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews didn't improve in Sector 1, but don't count him out because of that. We saw with Will Inglis and Will Harper, just because Sector 1 wasn't your best of the session, it doesn't mean you can't improve. If anything, maybe the drivers are sacrificing Sector 1, looking after the tyres just a little bit, so they have a little bit more life left in them in terms of temperature as we head towards the later stages of the lap. Little bits of strategy like that can make all the difference. As we see Alan Matthews now heading down through Sterling's, the left-hander, and onto clearways as he tries to use the car in front, perhaps as a little bit of a slipstream maybe. Every single 100th of a second counts at this stage in qualifying. We've only got 30 seconds left on the clock now, so these will be the driver's final lap attempts. As we see a nice improvement from Guy Swarbrick there, 1:32.5. He really put it together towards the end of the session there, and a nice improvement for him there. But we start another lap with Alan Matthews. He doesn't improve on his previous attempt. This is the one that will make the difference. This could decide whether or not Alan Matthews takes pole, as we are also on board with Will Harper. Will Harper will just about cross the line in time for another attempt, although that time wasn't blistering his last lap. It was a 1:31.7, so it's a few tenths off. Maybe there's not enough life in these tyres now to put competitive times in. Will Harper, rather Alan Matthews, having a little bit of traffic to contend with. Paul Millman in Alan Matthews' way a little bit there, and that might compromise him. Sector 2. Sector 1, he's just gone 2 tenths faster than his previous attempt. So this could really be the be-all and end-all in terms of lap time for Alan Matthews now as we head down Pilgrim's Drop. He overtakes Paul Millman. Paul Millman hugging the outside of the track there to get out of the way as nicely as possible as he can, while also trying to get his own fastest lap in. But it's all happening now in this final part of this qualifying session. We'll also join Greg Young as we see another improvement for Alan Matthews there. Greg Young on for a decent lap, although Sector 2 he's missing out just a little bit on. Guy Srobick also on for another improvement, but he chooses to abandon this lap actually as we go on board with George Brook Battersby. George Brook Battersby improved in Sector 1. Sector 2 not amazing for him, but let's see what he can do now as we head down through Stirling's for the final part of the lap, for his final lap of this qualifying session now. But we will join Alan Matthews as he heads round the Clark curve, carrying as much speed as he dares. Doesn't want to end up in that big gravel trap. Remember when racetracks have gravel traps? Not many do these days, but it's not an improvement for Alan Matthews in the end. He goes 2 tenths slower. An improvement for Greg Young, though. Greg Young he just about leaves the session actually, but he goes a 131.4 there, and a big improvement for George Brook Battersby, who goes P2 in the end, takes P2 away from Will Harper, but is only 100th or 200th of a second off Alan Matthews. And I imagine that made Alan Matthews clench just a little bit there towards the end of this session. 200th of a second, although it is Alan Matthews on pole as we close off qualifying there. That was a very close session towards the end. Well done to George Brook Battersby for an absolute flyer towards the end there. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to take pole position, but I am now very excited for race 1. It's all to play for, and we have some very competitive drivers posting some very nice times and all ready to race each other, I think. So I'll see you in just a few moments' time when we start the action for race 1 here at Brands Hatch. have just under a minute to go until lights out, and we are starting to get drivers lined up on the grid and ready to go. As we have Alan Matthews on pole, George Battersby P2, just at the final dying breath of qualifying, took that P2 away from Will Harper, who now sits P3. As we hear the drivers revving their engines ever so slightly, getting ready, getting amped up to launch away down towards Paddock Hill Bend. It's very important, the launch at this circuit. It's important at every circuit, but here in particular, a good getaway can make all the difference, as it can often become a bit of carnage, bit of chaos, a little bit of a bottleneck is the right-hander of Paddock Hill Bend. As we see, unfortunately, missing the title contenders of Matt Daly, Andrew Whitehead and Colin Knief from tonight's race, unfortunately. But we still have all of the contenders in terms of the AM Championship. They are all here and present and ready to enjoy some racing, which is underway in just about 10 seconds. So let's see who can get away the best. We are on board with Will Harper. Will Harper wants to get a good getaway here. He can possibly take back that P2 away from George Battersby. If someone gets a false start, someone's clutch has gone wrong. 6 red lights on the gantry. There's a collision already on the start, but we are away. A little bit of an unfortunate error there for someone down the order there, as we see Alan Matthews heads down. I believe that was Rob Whitney, as Alan Matthews heads down through Paddock Hill Bend, and Barry Clayton goes very wide, has to opt to run over the gravel there. Doesn't do the car too much good, but luckily keeps it facing the right direction, so no harm done there in terms of anyone else's race. As we see Alan Matthews still leading this race and about 7 tenths clear already. The top 5 drivers, apart from the collision that we had at the start of the race, they got away very nicely indeed. The mid-pack there a little bit more compacted, a little bit more intense. We see Guy Swarbrick having to run over the grass there as he misses that apex big time, able to keep it on track. That's the main thing. We see Steve Knight benefits from that greatly, and we see Guy Swarbrick dropping down the order there as Paul Millman is past now Rosie Hodgson. Rosie Hodgson now side by side, as we see Jack Hodgson. Actually, I got a little bit confused there, apologies. Same 3 initials on the timing screen there, as we see Will Inglis getting past George Battersby for P3 now. So George Battersby dropping back a little bit off that start. They're not the best start for him. To see Will English using as much curb as he possibly can there. A bit of dust being kicked up in the background. Alan Matthews still leading this race, and Will Harper back into P2, but he wasn't that quick through Sterling's. Will English was absolutely flying. It is now right on the rear bumper of Will Harper's car as they head through the final, what is now technically the final bend of this corner. I think it's considered 2 corners, but really it's just one sweeping long Clark curve. It is actually. Ignore me. As we see Will Harper dropping off from Alan Matthews a little bit now, and now about a second between the two. Greg Young having to enter the pits there. I'm not sure what that's for. We have all of the penalties and everything turned off for lap 1, and it's all gone wrong for George Battersby at Paddock Hill Bend. It can catch, drives out as I mentioned. There's contact between Will Harper and Will Inglis on the braking. I'm not sure if Will Harper's trying to defend that move there. I was looking at the background of George Battersby going off, but we saw them came together. Luckily, no one got spun around, no harm done there in terms of damage. I don't believe it. Just looks like it's all gone a little bit wrong for Will Harper through that first corner there. Alan Matthews absolutely flying at the moment. They're currently purple in Sector 1. He's in so much clear air, he doesn't have to worry about anyone else. He's now about 2 seconds clear. This has been a great start to the race for him, as we're on board now with Paul Millman. Paul Millman heading through Surtees up into P5, as it's all gone wrong for Steve Knight there. The back end just got away from him, and he might have dipped it onto the curb just a little bit, but for whatever reason the weight's transferred, the back end's gone around, and he's now all the way down in P10. It's all gone wrong for Steve Knight through Surtees there. Surtees, one of those corners here that can catch you out as well, as we see Guy Swarbrick now getting past him there. Let's see how he's doing in terms of catching up to Ray. He's a little bit further back off Rosie Hodgson, as Rosie Hodgson's hoping to climb her way through the field. Greg Young out of position down in P8, as there's a side-by-side battle going on between Jack Hodgson and Barry Clayton, as we see Barry having to taking the inside line there, and Jack having to go rather wide and ride over the grass there. That's put him down in P8 now. The 2 Hodgsons in P8 and P9. I hope that doesn't get confusing at all, but it might in just a second. As we see Greg Young now up into P7, and meanwhile still leading out in the front, it is Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews is absolutely flying, 2.1 seconds ahead of Will Inglis, who is also about 2.1 seconds ahead of Will Harper. Will Harper not had a great couple of laps there, unfortunately for him, as we see Alan Matthews setting 2 purple sectors on that previous lap. So he is gapping the field now, it must be said. He has been fairly confident in qualifying, and he looks fairly confident in the race as well. As we see the top 4 actually have kind of drawn away from the rest of the field, it must be said. About 8 seconds between George Brooke-Battersby and Paul Millman now, as we see Will Harper opting for an interesting line on the exit there. That won't afford him too much pace down Pilgrim's Drop. Unfortunately, he might be suffering now. That little bit of speed that he's lost on exit will be that momentum he'll be lacking all the way down Pilgrim's Drop, and now we see George Brooke-Battersby's right on the rear bumper of him, right behind that rear spoiler, as we see him now only about 0.4 of a second, 0.5 of a second maybe, as we head through Sector 2 now. Yes, so these two are probably the closest on track at the moment. Yes, they are, as we'll see them heading towards Stirling's now. A lot neater for Will Harper that time, so we see George Brooke-Battersby staying in the slipstream of him as he tries to gain him ever so slightly, about 0.6 now. So Will Harper has sorted it out a little bit towards the end of this lap. So we see a little bit of rotation coming into the car there. These TCR cars, obviously a lot of weight over the front end, as much as they try to alleviate that with better weight distro and better aero and everything. You can't ignore physics, and these front-wheel drive based cars do have a tendency to either understeer or kick the back end out if you ask a bit too much of them, especially under braking. And there's no better example of that than Paddock Hill Bend, where you're braking and turning right under braking, and already that wants to upset the car. Add in a little bit of gravity and a little bit of a drop away, that makes it even worse. But of course you can also just understeer off, like we saw with George Brooke-Battersby a couple of laps ago, as we see Will Harper using as much of the track as he dares there. The camera system has different ideas of what it wants to do than what I'm asking it. As we see a little bit of a slide from Will Harper there, that's cost him a lot of time. George Brooke-Battersby just gone to purple Sector 1 as well, so he's really going to have his work cut out for him, is Will Harper, if he wants to keep George behind him. As they head down through Pilgrim's Drop now. It's not amazingly quick for Will Harper that time. He's only 0.2 behind him. George Brooke-Battersby gaining now. He's certainly got the pace on Will Harper. It's just whether or not Will can put up enough of a defensive drive at this stage in the race. He doesn't want to use his tyres too much because he'll be suffering towards the end. Everyone opting for the soft tyre apart from Jack Hodgson and Paul Millman and Rosie Hodgson actually as well. So we have 3 on the mediums who feel like that is the safest option to get them towards the end of this lap with any towards the end of this race with any sense of pace, but everyone else opting for that softer compound of tyre, which will be getting hotter as Will Harper tries to defend with all of his might, although it looks like George has dropped off from him just a little bit now. And speaking of dropping off from him just a little bit, Alan Matthews has been absolutely walking away with it. Lap by lap he's getting quicker and quicker, although George Brooke-Battersby does go fastest on that occasion, 1:31.4 as we are on board with Alan Matthews as he heads through Druids. About 3.2 seconds clear now, so he is absolutely flying out in front and no real competition for the moment, but never count out a mistake. One tiny little mistake and that 3-second gap evaporates almost immediately, and we'll go on board with Paul Millman and Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton following Paul into Druids now. There's about to be a 3-way battle for P5 I think, although Greg Young did get past those two as they were enjoying their battle on the last lap. About 0.3 separating these as we head down into Surtees, and a lock-up in the distance for Greg Young there. Doesn't want to do that too often, otherwise his tyre's going to start looking like a 50p piece, and he's going to start to struggle in the heavy braking zones. But Barry Clayton now has the advantage of the slipstream as we head down towards Pilgrim's Drop, although the power levels and the gearing on these cars means that I don't feel like speeds are going to be the be-all and end-all around this circuit, although it's a very high-speed circuit. It won't make all the difference in these cars. Not an amazing time through the speed trap for Paul Millman on that time round, although I do believe that's a bit of a misnomer because it looks like, according to the other timing system that we use, Paul Millman did go a little bit quicker. But at whatever speed he went, it clearly wasn't enough to keep Barry Clayton at bay, because Barry Clayton is once again right behind him. He's now side by side. A brilliant move under braking, possibly? No, he's just a little bit too far back, unfortunately. Had to back out of it in the end. Well defended from Paul Millman as well, as we head down through clearways now, under the bridge, and it's still Paul Millman out in front in P6. Heading round the Clark curve now, as we see Barry Clayton carrying just a little bit more speed, going as wide as he possibly can, but now he wants to follow Paul Millman across the line, sticking within his slipstream. He dives out to the inside line there. He's thinking about an overtake there. That'll be very brave if it sticks. They are side by side, a tiny little bit of contact. Well done to those drivers though for keeping it on track and for keeping it relatively clean there. Very brave from both those drivers there, as we see. Looks like Will is actually getting a little bit closer to Alan Matthews now. Maybe Alan Matthews has gone a little bit too hard at the first stage of this race. Those soft tyres could be suffering, and it might allow Will Inglis to catch up, as we see Barry Clayton using as much of the track as he does. I don't think I'd even call that the track at that point. That is just a little bit off the racing circuit there, but it's all fun and games. It's no real ill effect from that there. It's just some good hard racing. It's what we like to see, and it's what we've seen all year in this championship. As I was saying in the Formula Alpha the last time that I commentated, I can't believe how quickly these two championships have gone. We're already at the penultimate round here, and it's going to be a shame to see these championships come to an end. But fear not, 'cause in a few weeks we start 2022's running with some exciting new cars that you'll be learning more about in the near future. It's still Barry Clayton and Paul Millman pretty much neck and neck, very close to each other. This has been a brilliant defensive drive from Paul Millman. One of the best drives from Paul Millman I think I've seen all year, and it's come here at the penultimate round. Paul Millman's had a great progression this year, it must be said, in the AM Championship. I believe he's staying in the AM Championship. Correct me if I'm wrong, Paul. I believe he's staying in the AM Championship for next year. But for any AM runners, racing next year, watch out for Paul, because I have a feeling he will be a formidable opponent. As we see, Barry Clayton is certainly struggling to get back past him. He's side by side now. He used that little bit of a toe, a little bit of slipstream as much as he could, but Barry Clayton's out in front and under braking into turn one. He gets the move done. Very nicely done under braking there for Barry Clayton, but an excellent defensive drive from Paul Millman for so long. As we see, George Buck-Battersby has finally got past Will Harper. Will Harper was also doing a fairly good defensive drive, keeping George Buck-Battersby at bay, but finally we have seen George Buck-Battersby get past there, and now about half a second clear already. So it looks like George is absolutely flying. He's been freed a little bit. Now he's got past Will Harper, although Will Harper may have a bit of a challenge, may fight back at him just a little bit, as we see George Buck-Battersby taking that bottom spot on the podium now. We will join the leaders once again. That is Alan Matthews and Will Inglis. Alan Matthews out in front, about 3 seconds clear of Will Inglis. These two doing some very nice consistent running, it must be said. The laps have been, yeah, as I mentioned, very nice, very consistent. Nothing too electric, but at the same time nothing, no real major mistakes there. It looked like Will Inglis was getting a little bit closer at one point, but that seems to have died down, and they've settled back into a comfortable pace that they're enjoying at the moment. As we see, it looks like Will Harper and George Buck-Battersby are very close together. What has happened to them? They are side by side. I thought for a second it'd been a big accident. It looks like Will Harper has just eked out in front of George Buck-Battersby, but he has the outside for turn one. A little bit of a lock-up from George there, defending and taking back that position under braking there. It was a very, very aggressive late move from George there. Excellent racing from the pair of them there. As we see them heading through Druids now, about 6 tenths separating them already. So it could be that we're seeing strength, drivers having strengths in different parts of this circuit, which makes for some exciting racing. Of course, this circuit does offer it all. You've got your technical, tiny, tight little corners like Druids, like Surtees, like Sterlings, although Sterling's actually a little bit quicker than you might first think. And then, of course, you've got the long straights, and you've got other circuits like you've got the other corners rather like Clark Curve and Paddock Hill Bend from the Indy part of the circuit, which test all different characteristics of the driver and the car. As we will now go on board with Jack Hodgson. Jack Hodgson's doing a nice job in P8 at the moment. He's it's all settled down for him a little bit after the start of this race. It looks like a little bit of understeer rather is starting to set in on his car there. See him yanking at the wheel, using as much of the steering arc as possible just to get round the Graham Hill bend there. So maybe the medium size not quite got enough grip to work for him. He's now lost a little bit of time to Steve Knight behind. Steve Knight obviously having that issue earlier on in the race. He's hoping to climb back through the field there. Currently running P9 and gaining on Jack Hodgson. As we see, it looks like Will Harper has dropped off the back of George Buck-Battersby just a little bit now. He wasn't able to put a charge on him down the Bradman straight as he was on the previous lap. And now we're at a stage where all the drivers are starting to settle in. We're at the halfway stage of the race now. All the drivers are starting to settle in, find their groove, and the action kind of calms down for just a little bit now. Everyone can have a little bit of a breather and not worry about an Alfa Romeo Giulietta sat right in their wing mirrors. As we see, is Alan Matthews starting to struggle with a little bit of tyre wear there? Didn't look entirely comfortable through Surtees, it must be said. That might spur Will Inglis on just a little bit, although it looks like he's actually ran away from Will Inglis just a little bit. He's about a second further ahead than he was last time we checked in on them. About 4.4 seconds now separating them, so even if he is struggling, he's still doing an almighty job out in P1 at the moment. So we see Steve Knight and Jack Hodgson, the closest competitors on track at the moment. Steve Knight is going to try a move under braking up the inside there. Steve Knight's covering a lot of camber there, actually, it must be said. But he was a little bit too far back to make that work, unfortunately. Jack Hodgson does have to go around the outside, just squeezes him as they head into Surtees. He's still out in front at the moment, but yeah, that's chronic understeer for Jack Hodgson as he heads down towards down through the Cooper Straight now and towards Surtees. as we can just see Steve Knight in the rear view mirror there, trying to find a way past, but unfortunately the back end of the car is locked up. That might have what caused his accident here earlier on. Maybe a little bit of brake bias that's not quite where he needs it to be. Back end is locked up, and like he yanked the handbrake on, and it's dropped him right back away again. So Jack Hodgson can breathe a sigh of relief yet again. But yeah, Steve Knight, right when he was about to make his charge, probably down the Pilgrim drop, was when he was probably going to get moved on, thinking about the inside into Hawthorne perhaps. But yes, a big lock-up for him there. That's rather ruined his chances of an overtake on this lap, I'd say. He does have over 10 minutes to go in this race, so certainly don't count him out yet, as we see. He is getting closer over again, only about 1.5 seconds separating them, so he is flying at the moment, despite how square-shaped his rear tyres will be at this point, I can imagine. Yeah, down clearways, he's absolutely gaining in the slipstream, and a lock-up from Jack Hodgson there will be spurring him on there. He does just about keep it on the tarmac. Well done to Jack for salvaging that corner there. That gravel trap is rather large and will take you a lot of time to get back on the circuit if you go out there. But Steve Knight opting to stay in the slipstream as he heads through turn 1 now. As we see his car bouncing around all over the shop. Yeah, the rear end of that car might not be set up ideally for him, but he's going to try and move up the inside. He's going to think about a move up the inside, although I think he's too far back again. He'll be hoping that this lap doesn't go exactly where the last one did. Unfortunately for Jack, he was a little bit slow on exit there. He tried to switch back to try and take that outside line again, but unfortunately he miscalculated it slightly and has found himself doing a little bit of lawn mowing out on 30. It's a big lawn there. It looks like a lovely day for a picnic. I can assure you it's probably not in the real world. About 1 degree Celsius outside in Liverpool at the moment, but that is just Liverpool for you, I imagine. But as we are now watch Steve Knight heading down Pilgrim's Drop all by himself, all on his lonesome, with Jack Hodgson unfortunately bringing an end to this battle there with that one tiny little error that spat the car out. Very, very unfortunate for him on that lap. We now have Jack Hodgson and Rosie Hodgson only about 7 seconds apart from each other. Rosie Hodgson's livery looking great there. I like the very green car. I hope that stays for next year's running. Of course, the blue on the front as well. Although I do think it looks best on the Alpha 75s. The Alpha 75s have really grown on me this year, I must say. Yeah, I think they're a cracking looking car, although I still think my favourite touring car out of the ones that we've used this year must be the 156, but of course we have some more exciting ones coming for next year, and one in particular really piques my interest, so we will be enjoying that in the commentary box in just a few weeks' time. As you see, Will Harper just about keeping the pace with George Brook Battersby. He's not going any quicker, he's still about 2 seconds behind, but doing a nice job in P4 at the moment. It's a shame that he wasn't able to convert what was an excellent qualifying for him into an excellent race result, although it looks like George Brook Battersby is going a little bit slower, so don't count him out yet. We've got just under 10 minutes of this race to go. And yeah, he's gained ever so slightly on George Brook Battersby as we head down towards the Clark Curve now. And he might start to enjoy the benefits of the slipstream, might start to put George under some pressure, and it might give him some extra speed in terms of lap time. He might be able to catch up to him. As we see him, yeah, it goes about a tenth quicker on that previous lap there. Speaking of going quicker on the previous laps, Alan Matthews out in front at the moment. Looks very comfortable. A little bit of a lock-up as I say that. Sorry, Alan. But about 5.5 seconds clear of P2. So this has been an excellent race for him so far and exactly what he needs. Unfortunately, he's a little bit too far back in terms of championship standings for this to make a big difference. Although the other drivers not competing will help in terms of his position. Yeah, about 5 seconds clear of everyone else who's doing an amazing job out there at the moment. And speaking of doing an amazing job, we once again join Will Harper. As we see, it looks like Steve Knight's had a bit of an off actually. Where was that? It looks like that was a few moments ago because he's back on track, which is good to see. But according to the timing system, he's had a fairly nasty accident on the front end and now has a distinct lack of front aero. So good luck with that one, Steve. I'll check in you every now and again to see how these already relatively tricky cars, I think. I spoke to some of the drivers actually at National Alpha Day. They seem to quite enjoy these TCRs. For some reason, it's never really gelled with me, this car. It's probably just my driving style, which can be best described as aggressive, and I believe other words such as you should probably buy some new tyres should also be used. You never want me in an endurance car, shall we say, which doesn't help in these front-wheel drive powered, in these front-wheel drive Giuliettas. As we see, Will Harper about 1.5 seconds behind George Brook Battersby now to start another lap. He is gaining, he is starting to put that pressure on, and if he's played his cards right, if he's done his strategy right, if he's looked after his tyres, 2 tenths quicker on that lap. he might have a bit of a tyre advantage towards the end of the race and should be able to start pushing towards him, as we see him using as much of the track as physically possible. Only half a second between the two drivers now as we head into Druids. A big lock-up on the back end for Will Harper. Doesn't spit the car out though, like we saw with Steve Knight earlier on. They're going to head through Surtees now, still about 6/10 of a second apart from each other. This is the exact type of pressure that Will Harper needs to be putting on George now. He doesn't want to be making too many aggressive lunges or too many risky moves at this stage in the race. He just wants to start putting pressure on and start forcing an error in front of him and getting that overtake done in a safe, clean manner so he can get on that podium, because that podium, I imagine, will mean a lot to him as we head down Pilgrim's Drop now and into Hawthorne Bend. Under braking there, it looks like both drivers opting for a very nice line there, just kissing the apex, getting as much speed as they can. Obviously not wanting to go wide and end up on the grass, as I mentioned, quite an old-fashioned circuit, and the fact that this has grass and gravel, so it actually punishes the drivers if they go off, as we see him heading towards Sterling's now. A little bit of rotation on Will Harper's car there. He thought about a move around the outside or started to put some pressure on there. A lock-up doesn't help his case too much, but he is gaining on the exit there. He's got the slipstream as well. They've got some lap traffic to deal with in just a second, but I imagine not entirely focusing on that right now. Will Harper's just focusing on trying to get past George Battersby, carrying more speed through Clark Curve. He's going to go round the outside now. It's not going to set him up very nicely for turn one, bearing in mind, but they are side by side heading down into Paddock Hill Bend, and they nearly make contact. I think they might actually have just rubbed some bodywork just a little bit there, but Will Harper hanging it round the outside. Beautiful move there. He's got the outside line again now, and that's going to hurt him a little bit through Druids, I imagine. Yeah, George gets a better exit out of Druids. Absolutely beautiful move from Will Harper round the outside there. Another lock-up on the rear end here at Brands Hatch. That's been one of the most common themes of the weekend so far. It's just been rear tyres not moving while the rest of the car has been. But we see Will Harper finally taking that position away from George Battersby. But it's certainly not secure. Only half a second separating these two drivers as we head down Pilgrim's Drop now. This time, George Battersby has the advantage of slipstream, although Will Harper's case is helped out just a little bit by Guy Swarbrick in front there. Guy Swarbrick going off just a little bit. He'll be wanting to move out of the way in just a second's time, I can imagine. I'm sure he will do that under blue flag conditions. As we see Will Harper hoping to get past as quickly as possible and build a little bit of gap between him and George. As we see Guy Swarbrick trying to get around the circuit as quick as he can, and we see Will Harper under braking down the inside. Very nice there. That's worked beautifully. That's worked beautifully in his favour. George wasn't able to dispatch of Guy Swarbrick through that corner while Will Harper was. George is still stuck behind him, while Will Harper can just kind of focus on his race now, focus on that little bit of air gap that he's got and build a bit of a gap. About a second and a half now. Not huge, but it makes all the difference at this stage in the race. We've only got a few laps left, and Will Harper was 2 seconds quicker on that time round. So yeah, really nice lap, all important for Will Harper in terms of his podium there. He now runs P3, only 4 seconds behind Willing Gliss. Willing Gliss still P2. Meanwhile, Alan Matthews about 9 seconds out in front. He's had an amazing race, very, very consistent, and it's been very comfortable for him out in the lead from lap 1. Second gap staying about the same for the moment as they head through Surtees. George Battersby will gain him ever so slightly down the Pilgrim's Drop as he has that slipstream effect, reaching speeds of about 135 miles an hour, so a little bit slower than we saw in qualifying, obviously. The car's having a little bit more fuel on them and obviously much more tyre wear at this stage in the race. As we will go on board now with Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews has had an amazing race so far, and he's just in a world of his own. He's got the racetrack to himself effectively. I'm sure he's having quite a nice time out there, although the tyres will start to come towards the end of their life at this point. But someone who we do want to watch, even though we've just been watching him for quite a long time, it is George Battersby, who's just gone purple sector 2. Alan Matthews actually I say the tyres were going off, he's just posted the fastest lap of the race so far. 130s, we finally dipped into the 130s there, so he's got some pace behind him certainly. But George Battersby, running purple sector 2 and a personal best in sector 3, so he's trying to gain on Will Harper as much as possible. As we see, it looks like Rosie Hodgson going just a little bit wide there, nearly going into the gravel, and a lock-up from Will Harper for his troubles through turn 1. So those tyres may be starting to struggle a little bit. He's worked very hard to get back past George Battersby, and now he might be feeling the ill effects of that, as we see. It's a little bit of a slide there. I'm sure that it was just perspective perhaps, but Yeah, we'll start to see these cars looking a little bit less composed than what we saw at the start of this race, although they did have a heavier fuel load. The tyres, of course, so important. The only contact between your car and the road have very little life left in them now at this point. There's only half a second between George and Will as they head down Pilgrim's Drop once again. They've been in this position many times before. They certainly know how to race each other now, and they're going to have to as we enter the final couple of laps of this race now. As we see, Alan Matthews actually, it might not be the final couple of laps of this race because I believe we have, yeah, he should actually start the next lap before the end of before the timer runs out, rather. As we see George heading around Sterling, still trying to get the advantage of that slipstream, taking a very interesting line there, setting himself up for Clark Curve as quickly as possible, I imagine, but dipping onto the grass ever so slightly when he does that. About 8/10 between the two drivers now, so this is where all the action is at this point in Brands Hatch, rather, as they head down the Paddock Hill bend now. Will Harper not locking up like he did last time. George Batterby going just a little bit wider, trying to carry as much speed as he dares. But it looks like Will Inglis is really starting to lose pace, actually. Will Harper's only about 2 seconds behind now. So, might be something going on with that car. I might have absolutely no tyres at all, might be trying to conserve some fuel. But for whatever reason, Will Inglis is slowly falling into the jaws of Will Harper. We could have a three-way battle for P2 in just a second if we're not careful. I'll be very happy to see that, as we see Guy Strawberry getting past Rosie Hodgson for that all-important final point, running P10 now. Of course, that point is very important with the AM standings sitting as they are. But yes, only 2.5 seconds between Will Harper and Will Inglis now. Will Harper being spurred on, I imagine, by George Batterby, hunting him down behind. An excellent job from these two drivers, these three drivers. In fact, everyone in this race so far has been a relatively clean and a very competitive field. And I look very much look forward to the reverse grid race coming up in just a moment as a result of that. You see the top 5 separated by about 20 seconds, rounded up by Greg Young. Greg Young obviously having that issue earlier on in the race. He's done a very nice job to bring it back up into P5, running just 20 seconds behind the leader now, as we see the leader has started the final lap of this race, still posting competitive times as the leader. But speaking of competitive, we go once again on board with Will Harper, only a second behind Will Inglis now. It will be towards the later stage of the lap, but if we do have a three-way battle for P2, it's coming on this lap. As we see, he's cleared George Batterby, well, relative to the car in front, but he's now only about 8/10 off Will Inglis as they head through Surtees now. And we will go on board with Alan Matthews in just a moment as he rounds out his brilliant race one here at Brands Hatch for round 11, the penultimate round of the Touring Car Championship. But we see Will Harper knows P2 is possibly on the cards if he plays his cards right towards the end of this lap. It's a three-way battle for the podium, effectively. This could come down to the wire. As we see heading through Hawthorne now. He just wants to play his cards right, I imagine, Will Inglis. He wants to stay relatively sensible here and doesn't try anything too risky, because if he does, it could all be undone. He could find himself running P4 if he's not careful. Such is the nature of this circuit, and it looks like Steve Knight's had another issue there. Still running P8 at the moment, but as we see the back end of Will Inglis's car looking very happy to turn in on him there. That's, I imagine, a relatively nice car to drive, although he is losing some pace at this point. But we join Alan Matthews as he comes round the final corner and onto the Brabham Straight to cross the line and take the race 1 victory. But we're focused on the battle for P2 at the moment. It's near enough side by side. It looks like Will Inglis is just about going to be able to defend it for the moment, but what an exciting end to this battle and this race that was. Will Inglis takes P2, Will Harper taking P3, and George Batterby taking P4 in the end. Didn't have that podium toward the end of that race, unfortunately for him, but it was very well deserved for Will Harper. And we see Greg Young coming home P5, Barry Clayton P6, and then we have Paul Milman winning the AM race in P7. He has done a fairly impressive performance tonight, it must be said. An amazing defensive drive against Barry Clayton that unfortunately he couldn't keep him behind for any longer. As we see Steve Knight coming home P8, Jack Hodgson P9, Guy Swarbrick P10, and Rosie Hodgson P11. So that was an exciting end to race 1. I'll see you in just a few moments time for race 2, the reverse grid race here at Brands Hatch. I'll catch you in just a second. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is race 2 here at Brands Hatch. We're all ready for some exciting reverse grid action, I am sure. We've got just over a minute until lights out, and if race 1 was anything to go by, I'm certainly looking forward to how the start of this race plays out. We are on board with Pullman by the looks of things. Unfortunately, Assetto isn't letting me see the rest of the field, but I'll take it, because just a moment ago it was refusing to let me in the session and was choosing to crash instead. So this is better. We can work with this. This is good. There's a racetrack, there's a race car on the screens, and racing's about to happen. It's all good. Nothing's going to fail with the tech, because that hasn't happened at all so far this season. But we are having some exciting studio upgrades for next year's running, so you can look forward to that as well. We just had a word actually from Andrew Brammer. Thank you very much, Andrew, for tuning in and giving us some useful information. It was probably a drive-through for Greg following Rob obviously having issues with the clutch. Assetto decided that it was Greg's fault, unfortunately, so put him through the pits for that one. What can you do? Such is the fun of sim racing. But we've got just under 30 seconds until lights out now. I can hear the drivers revving their engines, getting ready to launch, trying to get away from the grid as best they can. We've got under 20 seconds to go now, and this will be a good one. Can we see anyone else, possibly? Oh, we can. Yes, we can. Amazing. Right. This will do. We're going to stick with the Anfield, actually. It's always good to get a little bit of variety in. As we see, we have 6 red lights on the gantry. The revs rise, and we are away for race 2. Paul Millman gets a very good launcher, getting straight past Steve Knight, Jack Hodgson, Guy Throbrick and Rosie Hodgson, all getting a very nice launch indeed there, as we see the pro field heading through turn 1 very cleanly, as does the Anfield. So everyone's starting this race rather nicely. We must have said Alan Matthews getting ahead of Willing Bliss. Willing Bliss unfortunately misjudging the braking into Druids just a little bit and going very wide, running straight off the circuit. It's Rob Whitney who leads for the moment then. Greg Young P2, about 6/10 of a second behind. Alan Matthews, not the most amazing start that he would have wanted, still down in P5, wasn't able to quite clear the field like we've seen at the start of some reverse grid races, although he does get past Barry Clayton for P4, so it has gone relatively well for him. In fact, Will Harper has had a very nice launch up into P3 on the podium again for the moment. Of course, though, we've got 25 minutes worth of racing to go, so let's see what happens. But Willing Bliss certainly suffering after that start, down in P7 with Guy Throbrick for company, about 5/10 of a second behind. He's the only company for him at the moment. George Brook about to be a few seconds up the road now, as we see Alan Matthews has gone a little bit wide there, having to run onto the gravel. That allows Barry Clayton and George Brook to get back past, and all of a sudden Willing Bliss might have someone to battle with after all. Of course, these two were in this order in the previous race, only it was for the lead of the race. This time in the reverse grid it's for P6. But it'll still be a fun battle nonetheless. Rob Whitney leading now, about 2/10 between him and Greg Young, and Will Harper only 2/10 behind Greg Young as well. A three-way battle for the lead as we start lap 2 now. Let's see what happens as we head down into the Paddock Hill bend. Nearly 3 wide there. Will Harper thinking about a move, under braking there. He goes down the inside as Greg Young has to go a little bit wide there, although Greg gets the switch back. Rob Whitney tries to defend it as much as he can. Is he going to be able to block him off on the inside? He does. A big lock-up for both drivers there, and Will Harper having to go round the long way, going around the outside of Druids. Looks like he's lost a little bit of time there, and now has Barry Clayton for company. Greg Young then running P2, but going very wide, using as much track as he can, trying to carry speed through Surtees. Ends up doing a little bit of rallycross, as we see him getting a little bit closer to Rob Whitney as we head down the Paddock Hill bend, getting a much better exit out of Surtees, it must be said, and looks at going side by side now as we head into the Pilgrim drop, although it looks like he's going to have the outside line for Hawthorne, so that doesn't set him up ideally, although he's going to be very brave under braking. They're carrying so much speed, I didn't think that was going to stick. Very nice move from Greg Young there to take the lead of this race on lap 2, as you see Will Harper still in P3 at the moment, then only a few tenths behind though, and all of a sudden Barry Clayton's joined in on the fun. We've got a 4-way battle for the lead effectively at the moment, with George Brook Battersby not so much far behind that. This is very exciting start to this race, as we see Rob Whitney on the braking there, playing it a little bit more cautious than Greg Young. That's allowed Will Harper and Rob Whitney to catch up as we head down clearways now. A big slipstream train as they head into the Clark curve. It's like watching 2017 F1 as we see Greg Young carrying as much speed through the Clark curve as he dares there, and Will Harper just about sneaking in the inside there. just about making an Alpha Giulietta-sized gap, and down the inside of Paddock Hill Bend. That was an excellent move from Will Harper. We've seen Will Harper was quite confident with this corner in race 1, and much is the case for race 2 as well. He's now running P2 and will be hoping to get a little bit closer towards Greg Young. Now he's finished his battling, most of his battling rather, in this race, as we see Rob Whitney currently running P3, then going off track just a little bit, and all the drivers behind him following him in that. We've got a very compact field here, only 2.5 seconds covering the top 6 at this stage in the race. There's not been any form of bad incidents or anything. This has just been excellent racing so far for the first 5 minutes of this race. As we see Steve Knight getting past, let's see who that is. That is Jack Hodgson, yes, being overtaken by Steve Knight through Surtees. Rosie Hodgson a few seconds up the road from them as well. As we see Will Harper about 7 tenths behind Greg Young. Now this is a crucial stage in the race for him. This is when he can stop Greg Young from just charging away with little pressure. As we see a little bit of lag there, hopefully that doesn't affect any of the drivers. Hopefully that's just on my end. A little bit of a lock-up from Greg Young there into Sterling. But yes, this is when Will Harper needs to catch up to Greg Young, and he certainly is doing so in the slipstream there. Only half a second between them now. They've gapped the rest of the field by about 1.5, 1.7 seconds perhaps. As we see Rob Whitney putting in an almighty defensive drive to keep Barry Clayton and Alan Matthews at bay, and Greg Young and Will Inglis pretty much, although Will Inglis a little bit further back. Alan Matthews is going to try and move up the inside of the braking there, or maybe he just left braking to the absolute last minute, but for whatever reason he looked at getting the move done, wasn't able to, unfortunately. A little bit of a switchback for him there, but still very impressive from Alan Matthews into turn 1 there. But yeah, Rob Whitney, as we see a double wheel lockup for Greg Young in the distance there. Yeah, Rob Whitney certainly has a big task on his hands, keeping these 3 very quick drivers at bay, but I am sure he is showing why he's going to be in the pro competition next year. Of course, leading the race at the moment up in P3. No mean feat, it must be said, as there's contact between Alan Matthews and Barry Clayton as we head down the Pilgrim's Drop now. They are side by side. George Brook-Battersby fancies some of this action as well. They're going to opt for a slipstream train formation instead. It's like watching the Red Arrows. Going for a train formation instead. I thought they were going to go 4 wide down Pilgrim's Drop. That was never going to work. I don't think you can fit 4 Giuliettas side by side down Pilgrim's Drop, but still Rob Whitney out in front for the moment, although Barry Clayton's thinking about a move around the outside there, a little bit too far back unfortunately, and of course that is keeping it on the outside has left the door open for Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews is still sticking in his slipstream for now. These 4 very close together. It's like watching some form of IndyCar. Amazing driving from these 4 drivers here. Rob Whitney putting in an almighty defensive drive, and speaking of almighty defensive drive, Greg Young still in the lead, but only by half a second. Will Harper is gaining, catching him up as much as he can. Let's see if he can think of anything creative through turn 1. About 2 tenths of a lap quicker on that previous occasion. The back wheel jumping up into the air there, tripoding the car through the Paddock Hill Bend and into Druids there. He's going a little bit wider than Greg Young, missing that apex there, maybe trying to carry as much speed as possible through there. But all this battling between these 4 has allowed the 2 leaders to walk away a little bit. About 4 seconds between Rob Whitney and Will Harper now. Rob Whitney still leading this pack for the moment then, but for how long? That's the crucial question. Alan Matthews thinks about a move up the inside into Surtees, but he's too far back. But he's certainly putting the pressure on right on the rear bumper of that Giulietta TCR car, as we see Barry Clayton also very close, as is George Brook-Battersby. It is anyone's game for P3 for the moment, that all-important bottom spot on the podium. And all of these 4 drivers desperately want it, as we see Rob Whitney looking very nice, very composed through Hawthorne there. The other 3 drivers a little bit too involved in their battling to keep up with him, it must be said. About 3 tenths of a second now. That's a tiny gap, but in relative to the past couple of laps of racing that we've enjoyed, that is a huge gap, as we see those drivers only separated by at some point about a tenth of a second. Barry Clayton getting it a little bit wrong on exit there, and Rob Whitney getting it hugely wrong into Sterling, and he's thrown it away. It's all gone wrong for Rob Whitney. What a shame. He did such an impressive job for so long defending for those few laps against some very fast drivers, it must be said, and he has unfortunately relented. You can only defend like that for so long, and unfortunately for Rob Whitney, it's happened there. It's allowed Will Inglis to get past as well. He's now running P7, still leading that AM race at the moment though, by a fairly nice comfortable margin, so he can still take away some amazing points from race 2. Barry Clayton then running P4 with Alan Matthews now on the podium, although for how long he's gone a little bit wide on exit there. had to run over the grass. That's allowed Barry Clayton to catch back up, but Barry Clayton's still under pressure from George Battersby. George Battersby has not made a single error in all of this battling and has been putting pressure on everyone else out in front, to some extent letting them enjoy their battles, and has just stayed comfortably in the background, and he could be rewarded greatly for that in just a few laps' time. Let's see what happens. Let's see Alan Matthews starting to break away a little bit from Barry Clayton and George Battersby now. He did lead that race decisively in race 1, and we're seeing why now. I think now he's not having to battle Rob Whitney, he's not having to think of a creative way to get past. He's able to have a little bit of a breather, not too much. He's still got Barry Clayton right behind him in his rear view mirrors, but able to think about a little bit less about attacking, maybe more about defending, or maybe more about just setting some good consistent laps. Now that's what he needs to do with 15 or just over 50 minutes to go in this race. But still very impressive from Will Harper to be within half a second of Greg Young for so long now. While all that battling for P3 was going on, these two have been still about half a second apart from each other as we head through turn 1 with these two. Still, yes, very impressive drive from Will Harper, going purple in sector 1 on that previous lap. Carrying more speed down the straight is Will Harper by the tune of about 2 miles an hour. So he is carrying just a little bit less aero, and that is benefiting him greatly, I think, down the straight. It's where he's able to catch back up, because a little bit of a lock-up there won't be helping him too much, running over the dirt a little bit, although that seems to have helped him. He's near enough side-by-side as they head into Surtees. Is he going to try and hang it around the outside? I think he can't from there. He's going to have to carry more speed if he wants to, and that would see him going a little bit wide and off the track. So he's going to have to think about a move maybe up into Hawthorn, although that'll be very brave at such high speeds. He does opt to go round the outside perhaps, although he's too far back, I think, to make a move done from there. Only 0.3 of a second separating them. A little bit of lag on Will Harper's end by the looks of things, so hopefully it doesn't affect him too badly. As we see Greg giving a little bit of a lock-up for dipping onto the grass, riding that curve just a little bit as we head down towards the end of sector 2 now and down into Stirling. Let's see what he can do down clearways. Another lock-up from Greg Young there. He doesn't want to do that too much. He'll flatten his tyre out, ruin the grip. The tyre will find the flat spot every time he locks up again, and it'll just perpetually get worse for him if he carries on doing that. About 0.3 between these two now. Will Harper has the benefit of the slipstream. We've seen how brave he can be into turn 1. Let's see what happens now. This time only 0.3 apart. He might be too far back. He was 0.2 quicker on that lap again. Another lock-up for Greg Young. So his tyres starting to struggle just a little bit perhaps. Alan Matthews sets the fastest lap of the race, 1:30 flat. It took him all race to do that last time with half a load of fuel. Will Harper takes the move up the inside of Druids. That came from nowhere. That was beautiful underbraking from Will Harper to take the lead of this race. Another lock-up from Greg Young as he tries to fight back for P1. But yes, very impressive fastest lap from Alan Matthews there to take 1:30.6 at this stage in the race, with more fuel on board than what we had in the last race. He is running nicely indeed. In fact, gaining on the two leaders now with quite a bit of pace. Obviously, these two involved in a battle, a very heated battle. Only about 0.2 between Greg Young and Alan Matthews now. So don't count Alan Matthews out. Yes, he could have a bit of a Grand Slam weekend here if we're not careful. As we see, about half a second now between Barry Clayton and George Battersby as well. So that gap, still not a big gap, but compared to what we had a few laps ago, a little bit bigger this time round. Although it's closed up once again as George Battersby gets within 0.2 now. Barry Clayton riding that curve, the car dipping onto 3 wheels. As we see Alan Matthews breaking away from him just a little bit. Will and Bliss maybe fancying getting involved in this battle as well as they head down clearways. And they are now about half a second apart once again. Greg Young now dropping off the back of Will Harper just a little bit now, about a second between the two drivers. So Will Harper carrying an immense amount of pace, going purple in sector 2, running the soft tyre as most people in this race once again are. We have the same people running the medium tyres. Guy Swarbrick also on the mediums now as well. About 1.1 seconds between Will Harper and Greg Young. So Will has been set free and is absolutely flying. Alan Matthews might soon be thinking about a move on Greg Young. Greg Young might have to think about more of a defensive drive at this stage in the race if he wants to salvage a podium or try to get the car towards the end of the race. More locking up for Greg Young, back end locking up that time. His tyres might be starting to suffer a little bit, I think, which is unfortunate for him, as we see a little bit of understeer rather coming into the car now as we head down the Pilgrim's Drop for another time round. Well, that was a very exciting start to this race, and we've still only got about 5 seconds separating the top 5 drivers. So we've still got plenty of action to come as we enter the second half of this race now, as we see George Buckbasby dropped off the back of Barry Clayton a little bit once again, although as I said last time, it's only by about half a second. It looks like George is quite confident through Sector 2, although having said that, Barry Clayton's just gone purple Sector 2. So, as I mentioned in qualifying and towards the end of race 1, a very competitive field here this weekend. They certainly know the cars, they certainly know the tracks, obviously having done the track a couple of times in this championship already, and they are looking very enjoyable to watch indeed, as we see Alan Matthews getting quite close now to Greg Young. Alan Matthews heading down the Bradburn Straight, might be thinking of a move up into turn 1 if he can get close enough. He don't think he's close enough this time around though. Maybe a cheeky move up the inside into Druids. Oh, it's all gone wrong for Greg Young down through turn 1. Carried a little bit too much speed, maybe a lock-up perhaps, or just some plain understeer. Has seen him drop all the way down to P5. That is the downside of running such a close field, such an enjoyable racing ready field. If you are a driver and you make one tiny little mistake, you'll soon find yourself losing positions. He hasn't just lost a few positions, he's lost the podium there as well. He's going to have to work quite hard if he wants to try and get back through the field, and that now gives Will Inglis another contender to get past if he wants a spot on the podium as well. As we see, Alan Matthews has now been effectively freed. He's now got some clean air in front of him. This is now his chance to try and take the lead of this race. He's already done an impressive job to go from a lower down order, as we see Greg Young getting past George Buckbasby, but George Buckbasby taking the move back on the inside into Hawthorne there. Greg Young diving out toward the inside. Is that a big collision? No, it's not a big collision. My timing system. Ignoring that for the second then, as we see, Greg Young's aggressively diving out to take the inside of the Westfield bend there, but unfortunately for him, Dingle and Sheens, it's all gone wrong, rather in Sterling's in fact, it's all gone wrong. He's had to jump onto the grass again, and he finds himself in P6 once again, so not the Middlestons that he would have wanted. And Matthews is certainly gaining on Will Harper, although on the previous lap it wasn't too much to write home about. 2 tenths slower. We saw him dive to about 2.5 seconds behind Will Harper, now about 3. So that time is looking fairly consistent, but I would say it is coming down ever so slightly. Will Inglis now getting past George Buckbasby. George Buckbasby maybe having a couple of issues with the car at this point, because Greg Young's got past as well. The order constantly changing in this race as we head through Surtees now with these drivers. Another lock-up for them. Everyone's been running so hard, so aggressively. I think the tyres are having a little bit less fun. I didn't quite catch the track temps in the previous race, unfortunately, although I can tell you it's 38 degrees C on the tarmac here, so very hot indeed. It is the height of summer. Very envious of the drivers here, enjoying some sunshine rather, while we are stuck in the cold dark depths of winter. As we see, about 3 tenths between Greg Young. I nearly invented a driver there. I nearly invented Greg Buckbasby. About 3 tenths of a second behind George Buckbasby and Greg Young as we enter the end of Sector 2 now with these drivers. It's a three-way battle for P5, or P4 rather. As we head into Sterling, Greg Young getting a little bit closer to Will Inglis, but once again another lock-up. Those tyres must look like a piece of modern art at this point, much less some black circles. As we see them heading around the park curve, it's a very aggressive bit of curve for Greg Young. Their car getting up onto 2 wheels. He doesn't want to do that so many times. It'll either spit the car out or do some put a significant amount of load through that chassis. As we see George Buckbasby getting close to the rear end of Greg Young's car there again. Will Inglis in the distance, running a little bit wide on the exit of the Paddock Hill bend. Greg Young takes the inside line but defends. A little bit of a lock-up there, forces him just a little bit wide, but it made actually quite a good defensive move for him on this occasion, as we see him going into Surtees now, still out in front, but another lock-up for Greg Young. How many lock-ups are we going to see? How much tyre smoke? How much rubber is left on that tyre? It's just going to be on the cords in just a moment. Another lock-up as we head into Surtees now. He must be struggling with that car. He's doing a very impressive job to keep it on the track as it is at the moment, but yeah, it looks like he's struggling with that. This is him heading down Pilgrim's Drop now, enjoying the slipstream of the cars in front. Both Greg Young and George Buckbasby are, and a little bit of an error for Will Inglis there on exit, just a little bit of dirt kicked up. That will bring Greg Young ever so slightly closer, although it's still about a second clear. I imagine Greg Young is more focused on keeping George Buckmasterby behind him at this point. A little bit of a lock-up for him here and there. It does start to add up in terms of tyre temp and grip levels. Another one as he heads into Sterling's there. If he gets this car home in this position that he's in right now, I'll be very impressed indeed. He is doing all that he can to keep that car on track while still racing competitively. And speaking of racing competitively, we will join them in just a second, but I just want to focus on Will Harper, who's just posted a 1:30.8 blistering lap for him there. About 4 seconds clear of everyone else. He is not struggling with the car at all. He's looking very comfortable in this race so far. Greg Young doesn't go wide this time round at the Paddock Hill bend, able to keep George Buckmasterby behind. Will he lock up into Druitt? He doesn't this time. Maybe he can bring those tyres back into a more comfortable window as they head round Sterling, or not Sterling rather, as they head round Surtees. They don't even head round Surtees, they head round Graham Hill bend. About 3/10 behind is George Buckmasterby's head round Surtees this time. It is Surtees, I promise. And get ready for the long straight Pilgrims drop, the highest speed section on the circuit, reaching heights of 140 miles an hour in qualifying trim. As we see George putting a little bit of pressure on him now, only about 3/10 behind. He looks at a move up the outside possibly, or he's just trying to set himself up nicely for the corner, I think, from that far back. As we see, he's got the inside line this time, but he's too far back to make any decent moves there. Another lock-up from Greg Young. I imagine every single lock-up is spurring George on ever so slightly, just make him feel like, yes, this is the one where it goes wrong for him, and this is the one where it goes wrong for him. He's locked up, carried too much speed through the corner there, and has, unfortunately for him, gone wide at Sheens. He's come off the circuit and is now a few seconds behind George Buckmasterby. What a shame to see his race fall in the way that it has. He was running P2 a few laps ago, and unfortunately the car is rather getting away from him. In fact, he was leading but a few laps ago, and unfortunately the car not behaving the way that he would want at this stage in the race. We've got just under 5 minutes to go in what has been a very exciting race too. The reverse grid race never fails to disappoint. These touring cars never fail to disappoint, but it is disappointing Greg Young, unfortunately. A front axle lock-up, a big one there. That brings Rob Whitney into play. He'll be thinking that he could possibly get a move done on him now with the state that Greg Young's car is in, unfortunately for Greg. It all looks like this race has not gone his way at all, as we see now Rob Whitney getting closer and closer. Another lock-up to spur Rob on. Those cars. These cars certainly struggling, I think, at this point in the race on these tyres. As we see Alan Matthews trying to get closer to Will Harper. He's done about 4/10. He made that advantage, but disappeared by about 4/10. Will Harper still about 4 seconds ahead though. So Will Harper doing a very impressive job in the lead at the moment. As we see him heading down towards Sterling's now. Pretty much in a class of his own this race. His last lap, a 1:31.7, a little bit slower than Alan Matthews is, but in fact his absolute best is also a little bit slower than Alan Matthews is. So as we enter the final stage of this race, if his pace starts to dip off, we could see an exciting battle for the lead as we enter the final few laps now. Will Inglis has just posted a personal best, sector 2. About 2 seconds clear of George Buckmasterby. George involved in that battle for so long, it's allowed Will Inglis to get his head down and get a little bit of a gap between him and George. Barry Clayton actually posting a very similar time to Alan Matthews. So Barry Clayton, obviously also involved in that big battle that we saw a few laps ago, has been freed as well and is now sitting quite comfortably on the podium. Barry Clayton actually going purple sector 3, finding that time in sector 3 like we saw in qualifying. These drivers, the fuel loads now starting to get a little bit lighter. This is when we enter another phase of this race, the final phase at this point, when things can change as tyres start to dip off, drivers make mistakes, but at the same time the absolute pace comes up, because if your tyres are still in a nice window, you will set some pretty impressive lap times, especially with the track rubbering in with 25 minutes worth of running. I should probably ask Guy at some point actually. I don't know if the track conditions stay consistent throughout the weekend. It's something that I should definitely have checked already, and I haven't, unfortunately, but I will check as to whether or not the track conditions stay uniform throughout the weekend, in terms of, does the game basically forget a session's worth of rubbering in, or does it remember it through the weekend? I believe it should probably remember it, so the track will start rubbering in at quali, I believe, although I could be wrong there. We'll see Barry Clayton now actually getting a little bit closer to Alan Matthews as they head down clearways. And it looks like he's got a little bit more pace underneath him than Alan Matthews out in front. His best lap being a little bit worse, but the past few laps have been just a little bit better for him. A little bit of mistakes perhaps creeping in for Alan Matthews. Although, yeah, about a second for Alan Matthews in P2 there, slower than Barry Clayton, who's still about a second behind him. It's anyone's P2 to play for at this point in the race, I would say, although Barry Clayton on exit, dipping onto the grass just a little bit there, setting the car ever so slightly and losing a little bit of pace there. He dips onto the, again, using as much track as he can as he tries to carry as much speed as possible. Drivers now looking a little bit more comfortable in terms of their gaps, where they're finding their own bit of track to occupy. The only drivers I'd say under any form of pressure at the moment are possibly Will Harper. He doesn't want to make a mistake at this point, and Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews trying to put pressure on Will Harper, but at the same time trying to keep this P2 away from Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton, who has all of a sudden found himself with a little bit of on-track battles to be enjoying. After that big battle he had a little bit of a break, a good chance to gain some time, gain some track position, and now he has. Now he's only a second behind Alan Matthews as we enter the final couple of laps of this race now. We're on board with Will Harper as he heads down clearways all by himself and heads into the Clark curve and gets ready to start what will be it will not be the penultimate lap of the race, but it will be the penultimate lap of this race. Of course it will. Ignore me there. So now on the penultimate lap of this race with Will Harper, the car still looking further comfortable for him, as we said, although maybe I've just been looking at Greg Young's car for a little bit too long. That car not looking very happy at all. Barry Clayton posts his best lap of the race so far. He means business, puts as much pressure as he can on Alan Matthews on that last lap with a 1:30.7 as they head into the Graham Hill bend now. A little bit of a lock-up for Alan Matthews. The car getting a little bit squirrely. He had to run a little bit wide onto the grass there, and he finds himself heading through Surtees now with only about a second between them. That second gap has stayed fairly consistent, although let's see on exit what happened. Looks like Barry Clayton's carried a lot more speed on exit there. Now has the benefit of the slipstreams to head down towards the Pilgrim's Drop. We see Will Harper in the distance there. He heads through Hawthorne while those two getting ready to battle each other at this late stage in the race now. The car bouncing around over the curb there, very stiffly sprung, these TCR cars, as we head through Westfield now. Again, carrying as much speed as they can, using as much of what would be deemed track, although I imagine the fourth wheel was just about in that white line there. As we get ready to head into Stirling's now. Only 0.3 of a second separating these two drivers, as we've got another straightaway for Barry Clayton to enjoy the slipstream down. It looks like there's some lap traffic out in front for Will Harper, but that won't matter too much to these drivers here, as they are deeply engrossed in their battle which will go on to the final lap of this race now. Will Harper starts the final lap of this race. He looks to be fairly secure out in the lead at the moment, but let's see what happens. It can all come down to the wire here at Brands Hatch. Barry Clayton a little bit slower on that last lap than he would have wanted, about half a second between the two. Barry Clayton thinking about a move up with the Druids maybe. He's a bit too far back to make anything work. He doesn't want to risk anything at this point, or he could soon find himself off the podium as they get ready to go down into the Graham Hill bend. It looks like he's a little bit more composed than he was on the last lap. Alan Matthews wasn't as composed though. Gets a little bit wrong on exit, tries to carry too much speed. That gives Barry Clayton the inside line for Surtees, and heading into Surtees he takes P2 away from Alan Matthews and gets ready to head down the Pilgrim's Drop, but it looks like through Surtees, Alan Matthews has got a much better exit. They're side by side heading through the very narrow Pilgrim's Drop. No one's got the slipstream, but they are absolutely neck and neck. Barry Clayton has the inside line, should be able to defend from there, but he's still right behind him is Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews might be thinking of a move up into Westfield if he's brave enough under braking, although Barry Clayton puts himself in a very nice defensive position to make sure he can't get that P2 back. Although can he? We're going to head into we're going to head down into Stirling's now, but before that we've got the inside line here. Alan Matthews has the inside line but can't quite take it, unfortunately. A little bit of contact between the two drops him back ever so slightly. Barry Clayton dipping onto the grass just a little bit there. That puts him ever so closer to Alan Matthews again, but I think it's too little too late, unfortunately, for Alan Matthews. We're on board now with Will Harper as he heads down the Brabham Straight and crosses the line to take first position. What an impressive victory for Will Harper. A very well executed race for Will there, and commiserations to Alan Matthews, who couldn't quite take back P2 away from Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton, who fought for it very hard, ended up taking home P2 in that race then, but still a very impressive weekend for Alan Matthews. A double podium for both Will Harper and Alan Matthews. That was a very enjoyable race indeed. Will Inglis takes home P4, George Brook Battersby takes home P5, and unfortunately for Greg Young it's only P6. Rob Whitney takes the lead of the AM race, takes the victory here at Brands Hatch, so we'll be extending his points lead just that little bit more at the moment. Paul Millman taking home P9, Guy Swarbrick P10, and Jack Hodgson P11, Rosie Hodgson P12. As we see some victory celebrations from Will Harper. I knew I could count on some victory celebrations from Will Harper as he parks the car in an interesting manner there. Come on, let's attempt some donuts in your front wheel drive car. Come on. I try it at the Mito, it doesn't quite work. But let's see if we can get a Giulietta TCR to do some donuts, or we'll just have some victory weaves. Yes, a very well executed race for Will Harper here in the second half of the weekend running here at Brands Hatch. The reverse grid race never fails to entertain, and it certainly hasn't this weekend, the penultimate round of the Touring Car Championship. We will join you in 2 weeks' time when we have the 156s on track. We have the 156s on track at, I believe it is Snetterton actually. That'll be an interesting one. A triple header in the 156 to conclude our touring car running for this year. And it will be a shame to see the touring car racing come to an end for this year, as it has been a shame to see this Brands Hatch weekend come to an end. I thoroughly hope you've enjoyed the racing action this evening. I certainly have, and I'll catch you in a fortnight's time for some more